Ever get that feeling, that like the world is being run by like shadowy figures in these like smoke-filled rooms? Yeah, like it's a little too convenient, a little too, I don't know.
Oh, absolutely. Like we only see the tip of the iceberg.
Exactly. And today we're actually diving into something that might confirm those suspicions. Think tanks. You know those groups you always hear about, the ones that are supposed to be these neutral experts, advising governments on all sorts of important stuff?
Right, the ones with all the fancy names and big reports.
Yeah, exactly. But what happens when those experts aren't so neutral after all? That's the question, isn't it? And that's what we're going to look at today as we deep dive into this really fascinating, or maybe concerning, investigative article from Blank Spot. Yeah, they're a Swedish journalism platform really known for their, how do I put it, their no-nonsense reporting, really digging deep. Anyway, they uncovered this really tangled web, and it involves a Swedish research institute called ISDP, and there's potentially some shady funding going on and maybe even some influence on Sweden's foreign policy.
Oh, wow, that's getting juicy. So this ISDP, what's their deal?
So they're like a think tank, right? They do research on international affairs, security, all that jazz. But here's where things get a little murky.
Okay, I'm listening.
This whole story revolves around Azerbaijan.
Azerbaijan, remind me.
They've been in that long-running conflict with Armenia.
Oh, right, Nagorno-Karabakh.
Exactly, Nagorno-Karabakh.
Yeah.
And let's just say that in recent years, Azerbaijan's government hasn't exactly been known for its love of human rights or, freedom of the press.
Yeah, not exactly a shining beacon of democracy there.
Not really, no.
Oh.
Anyway, that's where ISDP comes in. Blank Spot, these journalists, they discovered that ISDP, this supposedly independent research institute, has actually been getting funding from Azerbaijani sources.
Okay, well, that's not great, but I mean, organizations get funding from all sorts of places, right?
Right, but we're not talking about a few small donations here. This is funding directly linked to the Azerbaijani government. We're talking about things like a construction company owned by the president's family, that kind of thing.
That does change things a bit.
Right. Because think tanks, they're supposed to be these independent sources of information. They're supposed to help governments make decisions based on, unbiased analysis. But if they're taking money from those same governments who have a vested interest in those decisions.
It's like getting your financial advice from someone who's secretly being paid by the company they're telling you to invest in.
Exactly. You'd want to know about that, wouldn't you?
For sure.
Well, that's basically the situation Sweden is facing with ISDP right now. And the timing of this whole thing, it couldn't be worse, because just as this funding thing was coming out, Azerbaijan, they escalated the situation in Nagorno-Karabakh.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there was a new offensive, accusations of ethnic cleansing, the whole 9 yards. So naturally, the international community, including Sweden, starts reevaluating their relationship with Azerbaijan.
Right, trying to figure out how to respond.
Exactly. And the EU, they even started discussing sanctions.
Wow, so you've got this tense geopolitical situation, a think tank taking money from one of the main players, and the potential for that think tank to be swaying Sweden's response.
Oh, yeah. Exactly. A recipe for
A disaster.
let's just say some very uncomfortable questions. So you have the situation, right, with Azerbaijan heating up, and you've got Swedish members of European Parliament, these MEPs.
MEPs, okay.
Right, and they're calling for tough sanctions on Azerbaijan. I mean, they're writing articles, giving speeches, really taking a strong stance. You'd think that's pretty straightforward, right?
Yeah, seems like a no-brainer.
Well, not so fast. Here's where things get a little stickier. While these Swedish MEPs are out there, pushing for a hard line against Azerbaijan, the Swedish government itself, they're dragging their feet.
Really?
Yeah, hesitant to actually impose any sanctions. Even when other EU members were on board, it's almost as if they're trying to just downplay the whole thing.
Which, considering the accusations of ethnic cleansing.
Exactly. It's a bit alarming, to say the least. And this is where ISDP, that think tank we've been talking about, they come back into the picture. Because Blank Spot, they suggest that ISDP might actually be influencing the Swedish Foreign Ministry's stance on all this.
You think? With their funding from Azerbaijan.
It's not like they come right out and say it, but they point out the timing. Remember how we were talking about ISDP getting funding from those Azerbaijani sources?
Right.
Well, get this. According to Blank Spot, the Swedish Foreign Ministry actually increased ISDP's funding, right in the middle of all this.
Seriously.
Yeah, while they're facing all this international pressure to hold Azerbaijan accountable, their response is to give more money to a think tank that might be, shall we say, a little biased in Azerbaijan's favor.
Wow.
It raises some eyebrows, right?
To say the least.
And of course, the Swedish Foreign Ministry, they say they vet everyone who gets their funding, and their decisions are based on, strategic foreign policy objectives.
Right. Okay.
But I think we can agree the optics aren't great, especially with everything else blank spot uncovered.
Not exactly a picture of transparency.
Okay, but let's just say, for argument's sake, that ISDP is totally objective, right? And Sweden just happens to agree with their recommendations.
Okay, big if, but let's go with it.
Even then, Blank Spot's investigation, it goes even deeper. They found this whole network of people and organizations all connected to ISDP, and it just makes this whole thing even more, well, questionable.
Like what?
Okay, so remember CCI and SRSP. The ISDP subsidiary, the one focused on Central Asia and the Caucasus.
Yeah.
Well, they're deeply connected to this American think tank called the American Foreign Policy Council, AFPC.
Okay.
And this is where we meet another key player, Frederick Starr.
Okay, who is he?
So Starr, he's involved with both CCI and SRSP and AFPC. And just like Sante Cornell, the ISDP director, Starr has a ton of ties to Azerbaijan.
Oh, really?
Both of them. They're on the editorial board of this Azerbaijani academic journal, Caucasus International. Okay, ready for this? This journal. It's run by a state-owned think tank, Air Center. And on their website, they say their purpose is to highlight Azerbaijan's foreign policy to the international community.
So basically propaganda.
Essentially, yeah. They're making Azerbaijan look good.
Yeah.
But it doesn't stop there.
There's more.
Oh, yeah. Brenda Schaffer, remember her, the energy expert we talked about before? She's tight with Azerbaijan's state-owned oil company. Guess what? She's on the editorial board of this journal, too.
No way!
And she publishes with CCI and SRSP all the time, always arguing for more investment in Azerbaijan.
Wow, it's like a whole network.
Right, this whole network of people and institutions all linked to ISDP, and they're all singing Azerbaijan's praises. Makes you wonder, right?
About their objectivity.
For sure.
Especially with their potential influence on Swedish foreign policy. And this is where it stops being about academic research and funding and, well, it starts having real-world consequences.
Right,
because these aren't just like abstract conversations about geopolitics, right?
Yeah.
You've got real people in Nagorno-Karabakh, and they are caught in the middle of all of this.
And the decisions made by governments, the ones influenced by these think tanks, they directly impact people's lives. What Blank Spot is showing us, it's just how blurry the lines can get. Are they giving objective analysis, or are they pushing an agenda, especially when you've got powerful groups like think tanks involved?
It's a good question.
It's easy to get lost in the weeds with all this, right? But it all comes back to transparency, These organizations, they have a lot of power, they influence policy, so if what they're saying is being shaped by stuff that's hidden from the public, well, that's not right.
No, not at all.
And speaking of hidden connections, Blank Spot, they dug up one more thing about ISDP that's really hard to ignore. And this brings us back to Frederick Starr.
Oh boy, what did he do now?
Remember how we were talking about Starr's connections to CCI and SRSP and that American think tank, AFPC?
Yeah.
Well, he's also got this pretty important position at a university in Azerbaijan, ADA University.
ADA University, okay.
And not just any position, he's on their board of trustees.
And what's so special about this university?
Well, ADA University, it's not exactly your average university. It's funded and controlled by the Azerbaijani government. They actually created it to train their diplomats.
Oh, wow. I see where this is going.
And the people who run ADA, they're about as close to the Azerbaijani government as you can get. Like, we're talking relatives of the president, high-ranking officials, not exactly a group known for rocking the boat.
Right.
So you've got Frederick Starr, this guy who's supposed to be an independent expert, advising ISDP on all things Azerbaijan, and he's sitting on the board of a university that's basically an extension of the Azerbaijani government.
Yeah, that's not a good look.
Not at all. Now, to be fair to ISDP, Blank Spot did ask them about all of this, all these connections, the potential conflicts of interest.
And what did they say?
Basically that they let their analysts do their own thing, come to their own conclusions, and that talking to governments that, aren't exactly known for being democratic is part of their mission.
Right. Engagement and all that.
Exactly. And that's what makes this whole conversation so interesting, because it forces us to think about the role of these think tanks, not just in Sweden, but everywhere.
Absolutely. It's a global issue.
Are they really objective? Are they really helping governments figure things out with unbiased research? Or are they, even if they don't mean to be, are they just speaking for certain interests? Their recommendations influenced by who's paying them, who's on their boards, who they're connected to.
It's something to think about. Because, like you said, this isn't just some abstract debate, right?
Exactly. This is real life. We're talking about Nagorno-Karabakh, real people caught in this geopolitical mess. And their lives are being affected by the decisions these governments are making, decisions that are being influenced in part by these think tanks. So where do we go from here? What have we learned from this whole deep dive into think tanks and foreign policy?
Well, first of all, we need investigative journalism. We need people like Blank Spot out there digging into these complex issues, following the money, exposing those potential conflicts of interest. But it's not just on them, right? We also need to be critical thinkers. Who's giving us this information? Who's funding them? What's their agenda? We've got to ask those questions, especially with something as important as, war and peace.
Because if a country like Sweden, which is supposed to be all about transparency and human rights, if they're dealing with this kind of stuff, well, imagine what's happening elsewhere.
It makes you wonder.
It really does. We've only scratched the surface here, and there's definitely more to uncover. But for now, that's it for our deep dive into this ISDP situation. We'll be keeping an eye on it, but we want to know what you think. Head to our website, read that Blank Spot article, and let's keep the conversation going.